At length she told him she was leaving on the 17th of June to be with her sister. She would return by the 20th. Clifford wanted her to go, positively, to have her little adventures abroad and perhaps come home pregnant. At the same time, he was afraid of her going. Connie sat and talked to Mellors of her going abroad. "When I come back," she said, "I will tell Clifford I must leave him, and you and I can go away. They never need even know it's you. We can go to another country." "We might," he answered slowly. "I don't much care what I do." "Doesn't it make you happy? We shan't be poor. I've about 600 a year. It's enough, isn't it?" "It's riches to me," Mellors murmured. "But I ought to get divorced, and so ought you, if we're going to avoid complications." There was plenty to think about. Another time she asked him, "What if you have a child?" He dropped his head. "Why?" he said at last. "It seems to me a wrong and bitter thing to do, to bring a child into this world." "No, don't say it," she pleaded. "I think I'm going to have one, so you'll be pleased." She laid her hand on his. "I'm pleased for you to be pleased," he said. "But for me it seems a ghastly treachery to an unborn creature." "It's not quite true," she whispered. "There's another truth." "Well, we want but little," he said at last. "Let's not make love to make money. Let's love for something else. Bit by bit, let's drop the whole industrial life and go backwards. Look at Tevershall. It's horrible. That's what comes of working for money." Connie was only half listening. Outside the world had gone still and a little icy. He turned to her. "Don't you care about the future?" "Oh, I do terribly," she replied. "Because when I feel the world has doomed itself by its own mangy beastliness, then I feel the colonies, or anywhere else, aren't far enough away. The moon wouldn't be far enough, because even they could look back and see the spoiled earth among all the stars made foul by men. Nowhere's far enough away to get away. But I better hold my peace. I can't change this shame. And as nobody can, I better try and live my life, if I've got one to live, which I rather doubt." Connie was uneasy. This despair seemed to have come down on him completely, and yet she was feeling happy. She hated despair. Deep down, she knew that her leaving him had plunged him back into this mood, and for that she triumphed a little. She opened the door and looked out at the straight, heavy rain and had a sudden desire to rush away. She got up and swiftly slipped off her clothes while he held his breath. She moved out to the heavy rain, running, blind, dancing. He laughed and then threw off his clothes. It was too much. He jumped out naked and white, with a little shiver, into the hard, slanting rain. Connie's blue eyes blazed with excitement as he joined her. The rain streamed off them both. Suddenly he tripped her up onto the path and took her short and sharp like an animal. He got back up in an instant, wiping the rain from his eyes. "Let's go in," he said, and they started running back to the hut. By the time she arrived, panting, he'd already started a fire. He rubbed her down with the old sheet. They sat side by side in a blanket before the fire. Connie turned and climbed into his lap, clinging to him. "Kiss me," she whispered. She knew thoughts of their separation were in both their minds, and at last she was saddened by them. "You don't mind, do you, that I'm going away?" she asked wistfully, looking up into his face. "You do as you wish," he replied plainly. "I won't go if you don't wish it," she added. There was silence. She waited. "Only, I thought it would be a good way to begin a break with Clifford. I do want a child, and it would give me a chance to let me make up a few lies," he said. "Yes, among other things." "Do you want them to think the truth?" "I don't care what they think. I do. I don't want them handling me with their unpleasant cold minds. Not while I'm still at Rugby. They can think what they like when I've finally gone." "Will you have a child in Rugby?" he asked. She closed her arms round his neck. "If you wouldn't take me away, I should have to," she replied. "What's the good of coming back?" he asked. "Oh, I must come back, I've promised. Besides, I must come back to you. I'll tell Clifford when I get back from Venice." "Would you?" he cried. "Don't make it difficult for me," she pleaded. A little smile flickered on his face. "I won't make it difficult," he said. "But you ought to take your time. Get away from it and look at it. I'm not keen on coming to live on you, being kept by you." She was a little offended. "But you trust me, don't you?" she asked. "Oh, absolutely." Again they fell silent. Then he spoke again. "I've been to the lawyer about my divorce. He said I ought to have done it before, and there may be a difficulty. She's now served with a notice. So is the man she lives with, the co-respondent." "Isn't it hateful, that performance?" commented Connie. "I suppose I'd have to go through it with Clifford." She suggested she visited on Thursday. He pondered for some time. "Well," he said eventually, "you please yourself as usual." With that he rose and opened the door of the hut. The rain had ceased. There was a wet, heavy, perfumed stillness outside. Evening was approaching. He went down the path, returning a little later with campion flowers, which he threaded through her hair. In minutes she dressed herself and prepared to go home. He would keep her company as far as the wood's edge. When they emerged from the trees, Mrs. Bolton was approaching them. "Oh, my lady," she said, "we wondered if anything had happened." "No, nothing has happened." At this, Mellors saluted the women and walked away. Connie arrived home to an ordeal of cross-questioning. Clifford had worked himself into a frenzy in her absence. Connie answered with amazing nonchalance, saying she had taken a shower in the rain. Mrs. Bolton, who was listening in the next room, listened to her with utter admiration. Once Connie had finished, Clifford said, "At best you'll be lucky if you got off without a severe cold." "Oh, I haven't got a cold," she replied truculently. That evening Clifford wanted to be nice to her. Throughout, Connie was thrilled at the thought of going away, to feel the bond snap. She couldn't help it. Clifford, who couldn't sleep, gambled all night with Mrs. Bolton until even she was too sleepy. Mrs. Bolton helped Connie pack, and while she did so, commented, "Most women never care, never begin to. They don't know what it means. Nor men either. But when I see a woman who cares, my heart stands still for her." Connie wondered what she meant by this, and began again to have some misgivings about going away. After all, wasn't she passing up her man, if only for a short time? And he knew it. That's why he'd been so sarcastic. Hilda arrived in good time on Thursday morning. Upstairs, alone together, Connie said to her, "Hilda, I want to stay near here tonight." Hilda looked attentively at her sister. "Where near here?" she asked softly. "Well, you know I love somebody, don't you?" "I gathered there was something up," responded Hilda. "Do you want to tell me who it is?" "He's our gamekeeper," faltered Connie, and flushed vividly like a shamed child. "You'll regret it," said her sister. "But you'll get over him quite soon and live to be ashamed." "I shan't. I hope I'm going to have a child of his." "Connie!" cried Hilda, pale with anger. "Doesn't Clifford suspect?" "No, why should he?" Hilda questioned her sister about Mellors. With each reply she became more angry. Eventually she gave way to Connie's intention, but only for diplomatic reasons. On the strength of her anger, Hilda warmed towards Clifford, and Clifford himself started to understand that Hilda, after all, was a decidedly intelligent woman and would make a first-rate helper. She had none of Connie's silliness, for Connie was more like a child. You had to make excuses for her, because she was not altogether dependable. They departed early. "Goodbye, Connie," said Clifford. "Come back to me safely." "Goodbye, Clifford. I shan't be long." Connie was almost tender. Everybody waved as the car went off. That evening, Hilda accompanied Connie to the agreed rendezvous. At the bottom of the lane, in the glaring white lights of the car, Connie saw a shadowy figure. "Here we are," she said softly. Hilda stopped and switched off the lights. The man stood under the trees. "Did you wait long?" Connie asked. "Not so long," he replied. As Hilda joined them, Connie introduced her. "This is my sister Hilda. Won't you come and speak to her? Hilda, this is Mr. Mellors." The keeper lifted his hat, but went no nearer. The three walked together down to the cottage. Nobody spoke, for there was nothing to say. He unlocked the door and preceded them into the warm but bare little room. The sisters sat down as Mellors brought Hilda a glass of beer and some food. Hilda felt, as Connie once used to, his powers of silence and distance. She saw his small, sensitive, loose hand on the table. He was no simple working man, not him. He was acting. Acting. She remarked, "It would be more natural if you spoke to us in ordinary English, not in dialect." He looked at her, feeling the devil of her will. "Would it?" he asked. "Would it? Would anything else be natural?" "Oh, yes," said Hilda. "Good manners, it would be quite natural." "Second nature, so to speak," he said, and began to laugh. He went on, "Well, I'm weary of manners. Let me be." Hilda was frankly baffled and furiously annoyed. Such impudence from him. Poor misguided Connie in this man's clutches. The three ate in silence. Afterwards, Hilda questioned him about his association with her sister, which enraged him. He told her that he had as good a life as hers any day. Hilda responded, "Men like you ought to be segregated as a punishment for your own vulgarity and selfish lust." "Oh, ma'am, it's a mercy there's a few men left like me. But you deserve what you get, to be left completely alone," he replied, taking his coat from the peg. Hilda got into the car and said finally, "I doubt you'll find it's been worth it, either of you." "One man's meat is another man's poison," he chuckled out of the darkness. "This one's meat and drink to me." The car started up the high road while the lovers returned to the hut. It was a night of sensual passion, in which Connie was at first a little startled and almost unwilling, but she let him have his way. She was a passive, consenting thing like a physical slave. Yet the passion licked round her and through her. She felt triumphant. So that was how she was. There was nothing left to disguise or be ashamed of. To have found a man who was not afraid and not ashamed. She looked at him now, sleeping. Completely gone in the remoteness of it. She nestled down, not wanting to be away from him. It was morning. Downstairs she heard him making the fire, going out at the back door and cooking breakfast. Connie rose and, standing in her thin, torn nightdress, moved towards the dormer window. He brought her breakfast. She asked, "You promise, don't you?" "Aye, when we can." "Yes, and we will, won't we?" "Aye," he agreed. The postman called from below and Mellors went down. He returned and said, "You must get up now and get ready. I'm just going out to look around outside." When he came back, he loaded up and they set off. He was being wary. She followed him dumbly with sinking heart. How was she to go? He stopped. She flung her arms round his neck and clung to him. "I loved last night," she whispered. "But you'll keep the tenderness for me, won't you?" He kissed her and held her close for a moment. Then he sighed and kissed her again. "I must go and look and see if the car's there." Shortly afterwards they heard a car hoot. He kissed Connie and made her go through to the lane. Connie's face was running with tears as she got into the car with her little bag. Hilda started the car, and they went away down the road. Connie looked round, but there was no sign of him. Away. Away. She sat silently weeping bitterly. "Thank goodness he'll be away from him for some time," said Hilda. Connie had been in Venice for a fortnight, and he was to stay a further 10 days or a fortnight. The sunshine blazed over any sense of time, and the fullness of her physical health made her forgetfulness complete. She was in a sort of stupor of well-being, from which a letter from Clifford roused her. "We too have had our mild local excitement. It appears the truant wife of Mellors, the keeper, turned up at the cottage and found herself unwelcome. He packed her off and locked the door. Report had it, however, that when he returned from the wood, he found her firmly established in his bed. She'd broken a window and got in that way. Unable to evict this Venus from his couch, he beat a retreat and retired to his mother's house in Teversham. Meanwhile, the Venus of Stack's Gate has established herself, claiming the cottage as her home. I repeat only this from hearsay, emanating from our own turkey buzzard, Mrs. Bolton. I would not have repeated it had she not exclaimed, 'Her ladyship would go no more to the wood if that woman's going to be about.'" The news affected Connie with a sense of vexation amounting to exasperation. Now she had to be bothered by that beast of a woman. She'd had no letter from Mellors, for they had agreed not to write, although now she wanted to hear from him personally. After all, he was father of the child that she was expecting. But how hateful. Now everything was messed up. She did not mention the fact of her pregnancy even to Hilda. She wrote to Mrs. Bolton for exact information and received a reply which confirmed Mellors' position as outlined by Clifford. This was a nasty blow for Connie. Here she was, certain of life, now trapped in a snare of lowness and dirt. She felt angry with Mellors for ever having married Bertha Coates. It would be just as well to be rid of him, clear of him altogether. He was probably really common, really low. She felt revulsion about the whole affair. If Clifford knew about it, it would be unspeakably humiliating. She was afraid, terrified of society, and this, its unclean bite. She almost wished she could get rid of the child, and then everything would be quite clear. Then she experienced a revulsion in the opposite direction. She imagined she heard his voice again, and warmth run through her again. Oh no, she thought. I mustn't go back on it. I must stick to him, and what I'd thought of him despite everything. I had no warmth in my life until he gave it to me, and I won't go back on it. Then she did a rash thing. She sent a letter to Ivy Bolton, enclosing a note to the keeper, and asking Mrs. Bolton to give it to him. A few days later, a letter came from Clifford. He was evidently upset. I'm delighted to hear you're preparing to leave Venice on the 16th. But please don't hurry home on my account. It is essential that you get your full quota of sunshine. Here, even today, it rained. Besides, I am admirably looked after by Mrs. Bolton. The scandal of the keeper continues and gets larger, snowballing, when I hear Mrs. Bolton talk. As a result, I feel myself plunging down to the depths, where the fish of human secrets wriggle and swim. I fear we're going to lose our gamekeeper. The scandal of the truant wife, instead of dying down, has revived to greater and greater dimensions. The trouble is that Bertha Coates has not confined herself to her own experience and sufferings. She claims she has discovered that her husband has been keeping women down at the cottage and has already had a few random shots at naming the woman at the top of her voice. An injunction has now been taken out against her. I've had an interview with Mellors about the whole business. He goes about as usual. I told him it was a nuisance to have the woman trespassing, to which he replied that he had no power to arrest her. I asked him if it was true that he entertained ladies down at the cottage, and all he said was, "Why, what's that to you, Sir Clifford?" As an example of impertinence, he'd be hard to beat. He made no trouble about leaving at the end of next week. I told him I'd give him a month's wages extra when he left. He said he'd rather I kept my money, as I'd no reason to ease my conscience. Indeed, he went on, "You don't owe me nothing extra, Sir Clifford, so don't pay me nothing extra. If you think you see my shirt hanging out, just tell me." The irritation and lack of sympathy evident in Clifford's letter had a bad effect on Connie, but she understood better when she heard from Mellors. The cat is out of the bag, along with various other kittens. My wife Bertha, as you've heard, broke in and found one of your books with your name on the front page. For some days she went round loudly saying that my paramour was no less a person than Lady Chatterley herself. Sir Clifford and the rector proceeded to take legal steps against my wife, who, for her part, disappeared, having always had a mortal fear of the police. Sir Clifford asked to see me and told me that her ladyship's name had been mentioned in the scandal. He said it was a great insult to him. He as good as told me that I was a disreputable character who walked about with my breeches buttons undone, and I as good as told him he at least had nothing to unbutton anyhow. So he gave me the sack. I shall go to London to my old landlady, Mrs. Inger, at 18 Coburg Square, who will either give me room or will find one for me. From this, be sure your sins will find you out, especially if you're married and your wife's name's Bertha. There was not a word about herself, or to her. Connie resented this, but she knew he was leaving her free. She was angry, but did not know what to do or what to say. So she said and did nothing. At last she wrote to Mellors at the London address, asking him to send her a letter to Hartland's Hotel, and to call for her on the Monday evening at 7, following her arrival from Venice in 8 days' time. As they travelled back, her father said to Connie, "Won't it be a little dull for you going back to Ragby?" "I'm not sure I shall ever go back to Ragby," she replied. "Why not?" he asked. "I'm going to have a child." "But not Clifford's child, surely?" "No, another man's." "But what are your plans?" "I don't know. Clifford told me after the last time you talked to him he wouldn't mind if I had a child, so long as I went about it discreetly." So, you can present Clifford with an heir to all the Chatterleys and put another baronet in Ragby. Sir Malcolm smiled. But I don't think I want to. My child, privately we can please ourselves. We may like this man this year and another next, for emotions change, but Ragby still stands. You'll get very little from making a break. But you can make a break if you wish. You have an independent income, although you won't get much out of it. Put a little baronet in Ragby. It's an amusing thing to do. Sir Malcolm sat back and smiled. Connie was silent. I hope you had a real man at last, he said to her after a while. I did. That's the trouble. There aren't many of them about, she said. No, by God, he mused. There aren't. Well, my dear, he was a lucky man. Surely he wouldn't make trouble for you. Oh, no, he leaves me entirely my own mistress. Quite, a genuine man would. Sir Malcolm was pleased with his favourite daughter, and he'd always disliked Clifford. He saw her to Hartland's Hotel and left her alone there. She found a letter from Mellors. I won't come round to your hotel, but I'll wait for you outside the Golden Cock in Adams Street at 7. There he stood, tall and slender and so different, in a formal suit. He could go anywhere. With a woman's instinct for happiness, Connie registered it at once. I'm happy now he's here. Was it unpleasant for you? She asked. People are always unpleasant. I knew I was a fool to be kind. And did you miss me? I was glad you were out of it, he replied. I'm going to have a child. He looked at her with darkened eyes. Say you're glad, she pleaded. It's the future, he said. And I'm such a terrible mistress to the future. But you needn't worry about having any responsibility for it. Clifford would have it as his own. He'd be glad. She saw him go pale and recoil. You wouldn't have to tell him who the father was? He asked at last. Oh, she answered, he'd take it even then if I wanted him to. Aye, I suppose he would. Again there was silence, a big gulf between them. What do you want yourself? Mellors asked her eventually. I want to live with you. You've got more than most men, and you know it. In any case, why offer anything? It's not a bargain, she continued. It's just that we love one another. Nay, it's more than that. A man must offer a woman some meaning in his life, if it's going to be an isolated life, and if she's a genuine woman. I can't be just your male concubine. The money's yours, the position's yours, the decisions will lie with you. Is that why you're afraid of me? She asked. Yes, it's the money really, and the position. It's the worldliness you have. But isn't there any tenderness in me? She added wistfully. He looked at her closely. Aye, lass, comes and goes like it do with me. But you can't trust it between you and me. His face softened. Maybe, he said. That night, she was quite determined that there should be no parting between him and her. He told her his divorce would be final the next March. But the baby will probably be born at the end of February, she said. He was silent and then said, It ought to be allowed to shoot the Cliffords and Berthas. Their souls must be awful inside them. Connie now had plenty to think of. She had to live alone until spring. She confided in her father. Sir Malcolm was angry, for he could not bear the scandal of his daughter having an affair with a gamekeeper. Not that he minded the affair, he minded the scandal. Hilda arrived, also furious when she heard of the new developments, and she too simply could not stand the thought of a public scandal concerning her sister and a gamekeeper. It was too humiliating. If Connie was going to be with the man, she'd better be able to marry him. This was Hilda's opinion. Sir Malcolm wasn't so sure. He hoped the affair might still blow over. Connie reconsidered and made a new plan, that she persuade Duncan Forbes, an artist, and one of the party with her in Venice, to pose as the father of her child. Sir Malcolm agreed to the proposal, having seen Mellors, and approved of his forthright character. So Connie arranged for a dinner between Mellors and Duncan Forbes, where the matter was settled on condition that Connie posed for the artist. Connie wrote to Clifford, I'm afraid what you foresaw has happened. I really am in love with another man, and so hope you will divorce me. I am staying at present with Duncan in his flat. I told you he was in Venice with us. I'm awfully unhappy for your sake, but do try to take it quietly. I can't bear to come back to Rugby. I'm awfully sorry. Do try to forgive me. Divorce me and find someone better. I'm not really the right person for you. I'm too impatient and too selfish, I suppose. Do forgive me and get rid of me. Clifford was not inwardly surprised to get this letter. He'd known deep down for some time that she was thinking of leaving him, although he had absolutely refused to accept any outward admission of it. Therefore, externally, it came as the most terrible blow and shock to him. He was like a hysterical child, and gave Mrs. Bolton a terrible fright by sitting upright in bed looking ghastly and blank. "Sir Clifford," she cried, "you're ill. I must send for the doctor." There was a pause. Then the hollow voice said, "I'm not ill. My wife isn't coming back." He handed her the letter. She read it. "Well, I am surprised at her ladyship," she said. "She promised so faithfully she'd come back." She began to weep. Tears also began to fill Clifford's eyes and run down his cheek. He was weeping for himself. "Now, don't fret, Sir Clifford," said Mrs. Bolton, wiping her cheeks. "You'll only do yourself an injury." He put his arms round her and clung to her like a child. At length she kissed him and rocked him like a child. Yet while she triumphed in her care of him, so she kept that corner of her weird female soul which despised and hated him. She despised him with a savage contempt that knew no bounds. The merest tramp was better than he. His behaviour regarding Connie was curious, for he insisted on seeing her again, on her coming back to Rugby. Mrs. Bolton opposed him no more. She understood what she was dealing with. Clifford wrote to Connie, asking her to return to talk things over. Connie showed this letter to Mellors. "He wants to begin his revenge on you," he said. "What shall I do?" she asked. "Nothing." She tried to put Clifford off. He answered, "If you don't come back to Rugby now, I shall still consider that you are coming back one day. I shall just go on in the same way and wait for you here, even if I have to wait for 50 years. She was frightened. This was bullying of an insidious sort. She had no doubt he meant what he said. After a period of continuous worry and harassment, she decided to return to Rugby Hall. Hilda would go with her. And so they went to Rugby. Clifford was away when they arrived. Connie entered the house, which she now hated with every fibre of her body. She was no longer its mistress, she was its victim. They did not meet Clifford till the evening. There was tension after coffee, when Hilda went up to her room. Clifford and Connie sat in silence when she had gone. Neither would begin to speak. "I suppose you don't mind at all having gone back on your word?" he asked at last. "I can't help it," she murmured. He looked at her with cold rage. How dare she? Then he spoke again. "You still have to convince me of the importance of the change. I don't believe your love for Duncan Forbes is real." "Why should you have to believe in it? You have only to divorce me. Anyway, I don't want to live here anymore. For my part, since you are my wife, I should prefer that you stayed under my roof in dignity and quiet. Leaving aside personal feelings, it is almost as bitter as death for me to have the order of life here at Rugby broken up, just to pander to some whim of yours." After another period of silence, she said, "I can't help it. I'm expecting a child." He too was silent for a time. "And is it for the child's sake you must go?" he asked at length. She nodded. He continued, "But really? I want my wife, and I see no reason for letting her go. The child is welcome under my roof, provided that the decency and order of our life is preserved." "But don't you see," said Connie, "I must go away from you, and I must live with the man I love." "No, I don't see. I don't give tuppence for your love, or for the man you are supposed to love, Duncan Forbes. You're too intelligent to believe in your own love for him, so why should I be fooled by such nonsense?" She felt he was right there. "Because it isn't Duncan that I do love," she said. "We only said Duncan to spare your feelings, because the man I really love, and it'll make you hate me, is Mellors, who was our gamekeeper." Clifford's face went suddenly yellow, and his eyes bulged as he glared at her. He leant forward. "My God, you ought to be wiped off the face of the earth. That scum, that bumptious lout. And you mean to say that you want to have a child by a wretch like that? Yes, I'm going to. He was speechless. It was obvious he couldn't accept the existence of Mellors in any connection with his own life. His look was one of sheer, unspeakable, impotent hate. "And do you mean to say you'd marry him, and bear his foul name?" he asked at length. "Yes, that's what I want." "So don't you think you'd better divorce me and have done with it?" Connie replied. "No. You can go where you like, but I shan't divorce you, and I care nothing about the child." "Would you even let the child, if a boy, inherit your title and have Ragby?" she asked. "I care nothing about that." "But you must, for I shall prevent the child from being legally yours if I can." "Do as you like." Clifford was immovable. It was useless. Connie went upstairs and told Hilda what had happened. They decided to leave the following day for Scotland. Mellors went into the country and got work on a farm. The idea was he would get his divorce, if possible, whether or not Connie got hers, and for 6 months he should work at farming, so that eventually he and Connie could have some small farm of their own into which he could put his energy. He wrote to Connie at the end of September from Grange Farm, saying of the people thereabouts, "The Colliers are a sad lot, a deadened lot to me. Dead to their women, dead to life. The young ones scoot about all right, but inside they're very dead. The mind needs money, and money poisons you when you got it, and starves you when you haven't. But I'm sure you're sick of all this. I don't want to harp on about myself, as I've nothing happening to me. I don't like to think much about you, for that only makes a mess of us both. Of course, what I live for now is for you and me to live together. I'm frightened, really, for I feel that devil Mammon in the air, and he'll try and get to us. There's a bad time coming. You can't insure against the future except by really believing in the best bit of you and in the power beyond it. So I believe in the little flame between us, as it's the only thing in the world left for me. It's my Pentecost. Patient. Be always patient. Now, I love being chased. I love it as snowdrops love the snow. It's like fresh water and rain to me now. Well, I write so many words because I can't touch you. But we have to be separate for a while. And I suppose it really is the better way. If only one could be sure. But never mind, never mind. We won't get worked up about it. We'll trust our little flame. There's so much of you here with me, but it's a pity you aren't all here. Never mind about Sir Clifford. We'll manage to keep clear of him. But already I feel a great deal of us is together, and we can live by it. Steer your course to me soon, with a hopeful heart. Mellors. You care about the future? Oh, I do terribly, she replied. Because when I feel the world has doomed itself by its own mangy beastliness, then I feel the colonies, or anywhere else, aren't far enough away. The moon wouldn't be far enough, because even they could look back and see the spoiled earth among all the stars made foul by men. Nowhere's far enough away to get away. But I better hold my peace. I can't change this shame. And as nobody can, I better try and live my life, if I've got one to live, which I rather doubt. Connie was uneasy. This despair seemed to have come down on him completely, and yet she was feeling happy. She hated despair. Deep down, she knew that her leaving him had plunged him back into this mood, and for that she triumphed a little. She opened the door and looked out at the straight, heavy rain, and had a sudden desire to rush away. "Going away?" she asked wistfully, looking up into his face. "You do as you wish," he replied plainly. "I won't go if you don't wish it," she added. There was silence. She waited. "Only, I thought it would be a good way to begin a break with Clifford. I do want a child. and it would give me a chance to let me make up a few lies, he said. Yes, among other things. Do you want them to think the truth? I don't care what they think. I do. I don't want them handling me with their unpleasant cold minds. Not while I'm still at Rugby. They can think what they like when I've finally gone. Will you have a child in Rugby? He asked. She closed her arms round his neck. If you wouldn't take me away, I should have to, she replied. What's the good of coming back? He asked. Oh, I must come back. She got up and swiftly slipped off her clothes while he held his breath. She moved out to the heavy rain, running, blind, dancing. He laughed and then threw off his clothes. It was too much. He jumped out naked and white, with a little shiver, into the hard, slanting rain. Connie's blue eyes blazed with excitement as he joined her. The rain streamed off them both. Suddenly he tripped her up onto the path and took her short and sharp like an animal. He got back up in an instant, wiping the rain from his eyes. Let's go in, he said, and they started running back to the hut. By the time she arrived, panting, he'd already started a fire. He rubbed her down with the old sheet. They sat side by side in a blanket before the fire. Connie turned and climbed into his lap, clinging to him. Kiss me, she whispered. She knew thoughts of their separation were in both their minds, and at last she was saddened by them. You don't mind, do you, that I'm... He dropped his head. Why? He said at last. It seems to me a wrong and bitter thing to do, to bring a child into this world. No, don't say it, she pleaded. I think I'm going to have one, so you'll be pleased. She laid her hand on his. I'm pleased for you to be pleased, he said. But for me it seems a ghastly treachery to an unborn creature. It's not quite true, she whispered. There's another truth. Well, we want but little, he said at last. Let's not make love to make money. Let's love for something else. Bit by bit, let's drop the whole industrial life and go backwards. Look at Tevershall. It's horrible. That's what comes of working for money. Connie was only half listening. Outside the world had gone still and a little icy. He turned to her. Don't you... At length she told him she was leaving on the 17th of June to be with her sister. She would return by the 20th. Clifford wanted her to go, positively, to have her little adventures abroad and perhaps come home pregnant. At the same time, he was afraid of her going. Connie sat and talked to Mellors of her going abroad. When I come back, she said, I will tell Clifford I must leave him, and you and I can go away. They never need even know it's you. We can go to another country. We might, he answered slowly. I don't much care what I do. Doesn't it make you happy? We shan't be poor. I've about 600 a year. It's enough, isn't it? It's riches to me, Mellors murmured. But I ought to get divorced, and so ought you, if we're going to avoid complications. There was plenty to think about. Another time she asked him, what if you have a child?